Last week on Firstline, we brought you the story of the South Australian government placing the Whyalla Steelworks into administration, with GFG Alliance, the company that operated the steelworks, reportedly owing hundreds of millions of dollars to creditors and suppliers. Well, that figure now has mushroomed to $1 billion, though GFG Alliance claims they're owed half that money as they count themselves as a creditor. Earlier this week, I spoke to State Member for Giles, Eddie Hughes. He told me about the chronology of why the South Australian government decided to place the steelworks into administration, as well as his thoughts on the federal government's $2.4 billion bailout package for the company's employees, though not a cent will go to GFG Alliance. Well, Mr. Hughes, thank you very much for joining us. The entire Australian community has been fixated on what's been going on in Whyalla because we know how important that steelworks is for the Australian steel manufacturing industry. I know it's over 75% of the domestic output, but we also know that that steelworks is the DNA of Whyalla and South Australia. How are you feeling over the past week? Because putting a company into administration by legislation is not something that happens every day.
Well, it certainly isn't. I think it might be unprecedented. But there was a need to do something unprecedented. The steelworks has been run into the ground, and as you've implied, the steelworks in Whyalla is part of our sovereign manufacturing capacity. It is the only integrated steelworks in the country that produces structural steel and rail using our ore on our doorstep. So it's an incredibly important part of our manufacturing capacity, and you could not just sit back and watch what was happening. And I know the steelworks well. I've been down there. I used to work there many years ago. And one of my sons is a leading hand maintenance fitter at the steel mill. So I'm told on a daily basis about what is going on, the lack of proactive maintenance, the what is happening to the plant. So as a state government, we could not sit back. We were over all the promises that were made, that we'd run out of confidence and we had run out of trust. So action needs to be taken, and it was unprecedented action, but that just shows you how dire we believe that the circumstances were.
I know that the state government had begun looking into the GFG Alliance's handling of the steelworks around late December. For you, when did you feel that things were going really downhill? Because the last time we were at the steelworks, there was that huge announcement in early 2023. The Premier was there, you and I were there, and there was this huge push by what this company was announcing and what they were being pushing. So what happened?
Well, that was the electric arc furnace announcement, and within a very short period of that announcement, the company started to change its tact. I guess I was one of those people that was somewhat skeptical about some of the claims that were being made earlier on. I always, when companies come to Whyalla, whether they're tire kickers or serious companies, I always give my usual spiel and do not go out to the Whyalla community and promise the world. So I always go on the promise and over deliver. Unfortunately, with GFG, from very early on in the piece, we got the complete top. We had the big reveal where Morrison was the Prime Minister at the time, was there. Stephen Marshall, the opposition leader, federal opposition leader, was there. The leader of the state opposition was there. It was a big deal. I sort of listened to it with an open mind. But somewhat skeptical. And I guess my view started to coalesce when Sanjeev Gupta, in what seemed like a thought bubble to me, said, well, we're going to have a population of 80,000 people. And at the time, we had 22,000. And that line was being repeated. And I thought it was incredibly irresponsible. So my skepticism grew, I guess, at an early stage. I mean, he did have one redeeming feature. He was a Paul Power sponsor. So that was, but otherwise, I just got Otherwise, I just got a little bit more skeptical and more skeptical and more skeptical as time went on. In fact, back 5-6 years ago now, the Financial Times interviewed me, and they asked what I thought of Sanjeev Gupta. My guard was down, and they actually said something quite explicit. I'm not going to repeat it here. It's but I was already skeptical. But when the electric arc furnace was announced, I did speak to one of their senior people. So I said, we just seen a contract signed off. I said, I haven't seen what the out clauses are in that contract. Can you give me any insurance? He said, yeah, it's in the waiting list. Yeah, we're committed to doing this. But within a few weeks, the way the electric arc furnace was being portrayed, that started to change, and then there's some other changes. And initially, it was all going to be internally financed. Then it wasn't going to be internally financed. Initially, it was going to be predominantly scrap, which raised a lot of questions in my head about using, electric arc furnaces. They're traditionally used as scrap. But Whyallah's advantage is the fact that we've got the ore on our doorstep, and using scrap raised a whole raft of logistical issues given Wyallah's location, and it raised issues about the availability of scrap domestically within Australia. So I just go, this sounds all a little bit odd. Then they started talking about what we call direct reduction iron making, which made a lot of sense because you're using your ore here in Whyalla. We've got a lot of it on our doorstep. But this was all dependent then on a joint venture. And I was highly dubious about the company being able to secure a joint venture given its reputational damage, and especially if GFG was going to retain majority control.
Now, coming up to the timeline frame, we know that the state government had been discussing the possibility of the future of the steelworks in December, and were actively starting to speak to the administrators that would eventually take over the country.
Was actively speaking to administrators, but concern about the steelworks went further back than just December last year. And so, so there's a range of concerns, and I guess the tempo of those concerns increased as time went on. And I guess when you start to get into December and just before, and the advice we were getting, things were coming to a head, and then it was a case of putting in place what was the ultimate strategy, because the state government was planning for a whole range of different contingencies, and ultimately we settled on the need to have legislative change in order to give the state the power to push the operations here in Whyalla into administration.
And that was done very quickly. You managed to get that legislation introduced to the House of Assembly within about 15 minutes, and then it passed the Legislative Council. This was very rapid action, because when I
think this was also unprecedented, and there was the need to do that. Because what we were reliant upon with this legislative change was the fact that GFG owed us money for water and money for royalties. So that gave us the in. But if we would have done the normal process, administrative process, that would have been taken ages. And it's entirely possible that what we were owed, what the state was owed, never mind the hundreds of millions owed to other creditors, what we were owed would be paid off. So it was clear that we managed to blindside the GFG when it came to the actions we were taking, and it was incredibly important that that legislation that was introduced into lower house passed incredibly quickly. And as soon as it was, and then across the road to the governor to sign off on the assent. So it was. I don't think it's ever been done before in an Australian Parliament. But I think it's a reflection of just how we viewed the situation. and how serious we thought it was.
We know because given the fact that the Whyalla Steelworks for the past decade has gone through a lot of financial turbulence, it's previously been in administration in 2016 after it was spun off, and then the future of not just the steelworks but the entire city of Whyalla has often been in discussion, given the fact that we know that this steelworks employs over 3,000 people directly, and then if you take away that entire infrastructure and that company, then the entire town could potentially collapse. While we know that would be very unlikely for anyone to allow that to really happen, it does show how tedious in many ways the management and the operations of the steelworks is, even though it's so important to Whyalla and to the Australian economy.
Yeah, and there's always that that national perspective when it came to sovereign manufacturing, the capacity, but also the localized perspective, just how reliant the Whyalla community is on both the mines and the value adding from the mines in the steelworks. So it's crucial. It's the estimate that was done during the last administration, when you look at direct employment and employment that was dependent upon the mines and the steelworks, we're talking about over 4,000 people. So we've got a population of just under 22,000, and a labour market that's probably in the order of around about, and this is a rough figure, maybe a labour market of 10,000 people. So you're looking at almost half of your workforce being wiped out, and then but then the impact that would have on the ongoing impact that would have on the community. So there was a real need for intervention, and sometimes I read, especially in papers like the Australian, or the commentary or the comments, they almost total indifference. Maybe the readership of that paper has to regional communities like Whyalla. I mean, that sort of line, why are we bothering to do this, a whole raft of stuff, and absolutely no appreciation, no empathy, and often absolutely no knowledge or experience of the steel industry.
We also have now this $2.4 billion federal government package, which it has to be stated is not going to GFG, it's going straight to the workers of the Whyalla Steelworks. And we know that right up today, Cordamentha has reassured all the staff who have taken leave, holidays and all that they will be able to keep being able to do that, because there were fears among a lot of the workers that time and holidays that they have just put in or put in several weeks ago would not be carried through. So you had potentially some very tired or very frustrated workers who would be very worried about their future. But we do know as of today that they will be allowed to take leave. Are operations just pretty much running normally at the moment?
And yes, they're running normally. Iron has been made, steel has been produced. Cordamentha have got a hard job in front of them. It's good that it looks like BlueScope are going to play an advisory role. And the thing about Cordamentha is that they've been here before. They know the steelworks. They know the community. And there was some difficulties the last time because people had to take ultimately voted on a 10% pay cut, and that that did not go down well. But ultimately the workforce voted for it. I've been given an assurance this time there's not going to be any pay cuts, and people's conditions are going to be looked after. And it's important that those accrued benefits are also available to the workforce.
Is there anything about potential job losses or job cuts or anything happening there?
No, it's my understanding that there's not going to be steelworks. There's not going to be any job losses. And indeed, when it was still owned by GFG, they flagged that it was actually understaffed, and others areas of the plant were there. Yeah, they've got shortages of tradies and operators, and that can be deeply concerning. Yeah, given the nature of an integrated steelworks, it's not just the pressure that staff workers get put under, but it's always that in the background, always that concern around safety, and that then becomes amplified when you've got a plant that has had little in the way of proactive maintenance. So that combination of the two things, insufficient maintenance, and on the staffing in some areas, that is concerning. So, those things are going to be addressed. Now, the package of 2.4 billion is broken up. There's 1.9 billion on the table for a potential new owner, and then there's about 384 million, I think it is, for to operate the plan during this period of administration.
Do we have any indication now about a certain time frame for when KordaMentha is looking to potentially find the suitable buyer and for those new buyers to take full ownership and operation of the steelworks? I know that the federal government is possibly mooting. They might have a golden share in the steelworks to help keep things stabilized, but of course it will need a proper full-time majority owner or a consortium that would be able to run this facility, as well as to avoid all those previous mistakes that the previous owners, including GFG, have.
Yeah, and you make some points there about learning from the past. Obviously, you want the administration to be as short as possible, but we also want an incredibly thorough due diligence process when it comes to a transition to either a new owner or a consortium. So the sooner the better. If we can find a new owner, it's So it's the last administration went for around about 17 months, and it was interesting that towards the pointy end of that, when the successful bidder was going to be selected, it was the Korean entities that were the preferred bidder, and that changed at the last moment. I think the nature of the offer, but I think the Koreans also wanted an extension of time, and I guess the view of the administrators was that it had already been an administration for 17 months or thereabouts, and they needed to have a new owner. And Sanjeev Gupta had made the bid. You could argue, and hindsight's a great thing. You could argue that maybe the due diligence would have been more thorough. And some people have put it to me, well, it should have been Aussie companies. But some of the Aussie companies that had bids in were going to just break what was Arium up, and a number of the Aussie companies saw the steelworks as a liability. So the interest was in the Eastern Seaboard operations and potentially the iron ore. The iron ore prices had been a little bit depressed and did start to escalate. Not long after the sale. So, the sooner we get a new owner and a credible owner, an owner that's willing to invest with the assistance of the $1.9 billion package that the federal government and the state government have put on the table, the sooner we get that done, the better.
And what is the state government doing during this administration period, aside from, of course, passing that legislation and, really getting the ball running to get the steelworks back on an even keel?
Yeah, the state government's actually making a very significant financial contribution. We had planned, and in some respects, the initial civil work had started on a world-first hydrogen power plant here in Whyalla with a 200 megawatt peaking station with 250 megawatts of electrolyzers and some storage, and that was when we had announced that prior to the 2022 election. That came with a price tag of around about the 600 million mark. Now we had to make a very difficult decision when it came to what our priorities were, and the priority was clearly ensuring the future of a viable steel industry in Whyalla. And so the hydrogen element, which was partly Whyalla's location was chosen based on the fact that we do have a steelworks here. So the hydrogen element has been shelved for the time being. It's so that money has now been freed up to put into that budgeted money has been freed up to be put into the steelworks.
And yet, bizarrely, of course, opposition leader Peter Dutton's come out this week saying he does back the government's bailout for the steelworks, but as long as the money doesn't go towards any hydrogen power. I mean, I've first personally looking at that kind of remarks, I don't think it's really helping with that type of rhetoric, especially if you're talking about workers' livelihoods and an entire town of 22,000 people on the line. And given the fact that we're about to go into a federal election, we know that Peter Dutton needs as many votes as he can get to even have a go at getting into government again.
Yeah, and it's an interesting comment, and it partly reflects his level of ignorance when it comes to iron and steel making. It's because the hydrogen wasn't, if you like, a power source, even though it could provide power for the steelworks. The important thing about hydrogen, and this is long term, and I've always been very upfront in stating that when it comes to hydrogen, we've got to be able to provide it. We're talking about renewable-based hydrogen. We've got to be able to provide it commercially at scale, and we're some way away from being able to do that. But the important thing about hydrogen is that it is a substitute for coking coal in the iron making process. So it's a reductant in that process. And if you were using a direct reduction iron plant, which is what was planned, you'd be able to produce the essentially green iron to feed into the steel making process or potentially an export industry. Now, none of that is going to happen overnight, but we should have our eyes on the future, looking at that far horizon when we look at what the transition might be, because we've got literally billions of tons of magnetite that is particularly suited to direct reduction iron making and the use of, in the long term, the use of hydrogen. But as a transition process, if we go to direct reduction iron making, it's not going to be hydrogen overnight. It will be natural gas, and we need to improve the gas capacity to Whyalla if we go down that track. And if we go down that track, it sets us up when hydrogen is available commercially at scale. It sets us up for that transition, and it'll be interesting to watch what is happening globally. And the Swedes, with their hybrid project, will be the first of the full-scale iron and steel producers using renewable-based hydrogen. So there'll be valuable learning lessons from that. Sometimes if you're going to be the first mover, sometimes there's risks that come with that, but there's also often real opportunities that come as well. But the overwhelming odds, we're not going to be the first mover. The Swedes, potentially others, will be the first mover. We can learn from that, and in the meantime, the costs in relation to some of the technologies, whether electrolyzers or what have you, will come down. So we should be looking to long term while looking at what the immediate steps are.
And this also comes at what could potentially be quite a vulnerable time for the steel industry itself. We know the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, is over in the United States at the moment. We are bracing, of course, for any potential tariffs, and given Donald Trump's very erratic behaviour as US president, we're not too sure, of course, what kind of tariffs, if any, would be applied, but also what industries. And we know that there has been concern from the Mayor of Whyalla, Phil Stone, about the whole industry being flooded with cheap steel, or there could be the potential trade war with China, which could make the situation in Whyalla very, very difficult, especially if steel prices fluctuate very badly or they struggle to compete with international exports.
Yeah, that was certainly the geopolitical situation and the nature of the Trump regime raised a whole raft of concerns. Whyalla would not be in a direct sense impacted by the tariffs. We don't import product from Whyalla to the United States, but the point that the mayor was making the collateral damage through the attempts to dump steel on the Australian market, and we can take action when it comes to dumping at a federal level. But it's always been my view that we need to improve our steel procurement policy in this country. And back in 2015, as the local member, I initiated the change to steel procurement policy in South Australia. It falls just short of mandating, but it's two elements of policy taken together benefits the steel industry here in Whyalla and in Australia. And indeed, at the time, the peak body for the steel industry, the Australian Steel Institute, said it was by far the best steel procurement policy in the nation. And I believe that we should move in that direction. We need to look after our manufacturing, but we need to do it in a smart way. We don't want other countries dumping product. Of course, dumping's got a particular meaning. They're putting product into your country under the cost of production. We don't want that.
And it's creating a glut in the market, which would affect supply and demand and prices, which also could create a knock-on effect for other businesses. Like here in the Northwest, of course, we have a major steel import company that refines all the steel in Tamworth, as well as all the mines around Gunnedah that need to use steel for construction, for infrastructure. So given any problems that could happen from Whyalla, this could have happened a knock-on effect for us here in the Northwest.
Yeah, and I think it's that the federal government have to be alert to what is going on. You do not want to sacrifice essential industries on just on some sort of free market, free trade ideology. Now, I know that we're a trading nation, and so I know that this is always a question of balance. Our primary producers export a lot of product. We obviously export a lot of mineral product overseas, but we do need to ensure that we do retain some essential building blocks of our manufacturing capability. And structural steel and rail is one of those essential building blocks. And there's this whole issue about the period that we now live in, just this geopolitical turmoil that I think is going to get potentially a lot worse. One hope you hope not, but in periods like that, you don't want to be generate massive vulnerabilities through dependency on other countries. Now, like I said, this is always a question of balance. We run a big trade surplus with China. And we've seen it firsthand here in South Australia. Some of our rock lobster industry was really badly hit. Barley producers were badly hit. The wine industry was badly hit. So we've got to be mindful of the overall complex picture and have smart politicians that can, if you like, find that balance.
Are you one of those smart politicians?
I'm just a humble backbencher.
Because often smart and politicians are not often used in the same sentence.
Yeah. Well, I think politicians are often given a hard time. Sometimes more than deserved. At times, but at other times, it's a lot of hard work goes on, often behind the scenes that people don't see. So I think most people are there to try and do the best, but it's complicated.
And finally, Mr. Hughes, how is the mood in Whyalla at the moment? When I spoke to Mayor Stone last week, the town was jubilant, and you figure out if a company is being put into administration, not just into administration, but by the state government, this could often be one of concern or anger or uncertainty. But he told me that the people are just jubilant. And that is something that you never heard.
It's an incredibly, administration and happiness that usually do not go together. But in this case, the uplift in mood in the community, because people were just over the uncertainty, and and they wanted action taken. And I think the action that's been taken has the scale of it has taken people by surprise. And one of the issues there that we haven't really mentioned is that a lot of the small and medium-sized contractors, locally based or South Australian based, that were owed a lot of money by GFG, that work had dried up almost there completely without any transition. For some of the essential ones, GFG still wanted to go in and do work, but they weren't going to pay them. Yeah, so that wasn't going to happen.
Well, it also shows a lot of very big concerns about how that company has been operating. And we know as of today, several executives have departed GFG Alliance.
Yeah, that's right.
And there's a lot of queries and questions about how Mr. Gupta has been running this company, because we believe that it could potentially be on the brink. And we know that he's trying to at least salvage something. But given the fact of what you've told me, and what we've seen over the past week, this is a company that is in dire straits.
Yeah, when you look at it, it's my understanding is, and I'm happy to be corrected, that in that GFG empire, there's 200 shell companies. Yeah, so the complexity, the layer there complexity is amazing. But the thing about what we've done here in Whyalla is the package that we provided for this largely local contractor base, often family businesses that have been built up over the years, often very specialised skills. They were in dire straits. One or two have already gone to the wall, and a whole heap of others were going to go to the wall. And what we managed to do is just get rid of that. What we managed to do was put in place a package that, when we announced it, was a room full of contractors. There was initially stunned silence, and then the Premier goes, "I thought you might be pleased with this," and then it was just that massive applause, because people could not believe what they were hearing. And some of those companies went out, some of the owners of those companies went out and got very pissed at me. So, in celebration, there was a few bottles of bubbles and other stuff cracked that night, because it's been a massive relief to those companies, and the enormous stress that GFG put them under.
And not just in, of course, Whyalla, but our old stomping grounds of Port Augusta and Port Pirie as well, and many of these smaller communities that have been trying to attract people back to the regions. And we know all this renewable energy, the mining industries from Lee Creek all the way to Port Augusta, the electrolyzers at Port Pirie, the increased tourism in Port Lincoln, and seeing what is wanting to be achieved. This almost could have been a massive roadblock. And we know how difficult it is to try and get people not only to come to these regional areas, but to get them to stay too.
Yeah, and the essential, we talk about having livability, and it's important. But ultimately, the underlying factor in all of this is having jobs and secure jobs, and hopefully well-paid jobs. I think there's enormous potential in this region. The potential for BHP, they're looking to triple copper production, which is going to have a massive impact on this state. There's a whole range of projects around the region. Some will get up, some won't get up, but there is a positive vibe. And unfortunately, what's going on with GFG was undermining that positive vibe. You mentioned the other communities. We've got people in Port Augusta that work here in Whyalla at the steelworks. We've got Whyalla people working in Port Augusta, maybe at the prison or elsewhere. So these communities, we travel between ourselves, jobs in different communities. But I know, having lived in this community for a long time, that one of the things that makes a difference is a secure employment base in a community. And when you don't have that, you have a whole raft of issues.
Eddie Hughes, thank you for joining Firstline.
Oh, it's good to see you again. Yes, all the best.